Emily Dickinson is so underrated, so vastly underrated. In today's poem, we get but 8 lines of poetry, and in those 8 lines of poetry, we get a theory for the entire use case scenario of literature. In those 8 lines of poetry, which seem, while reading them, very obvious, it's not until later where you start to think about things that they become a little bit more obscure. In those 8 lines of poetry, we have every reason you could ever want to read a book. And not only that, we have a great opening line. There is no frigate like a book. How and why that line is not plastered on all 4 walls of every library in America, I have no idea. This video is part of 3 separate playlists here on the channel. Number 1 being obviously the Echoes of Emily playlist, but number 2 being a playlist of Emily Dickinson poetry discussions, and third, the general playlist for poetry discussions. If you like or appreciate the work that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. And if you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing that I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. So consider hitting the subscribe button to stick around for more literature in the future. There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any corsairs like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without a press of toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. So when we start looking at this poem, there is no frigate like a book. That is to say, there is no warship quite like a book to take us lands away. That part, I think, is obvious. Nor any corsairs like a page. Corsair's more of a zipping type of boat, at least from what I understand of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take. You buy a book once and you get to travel those lands your entire life. It is a permanent vacation, a permanent vacation spot. Even in the 1860s, when books were indeed more expensive than they are now, and now you get to go to the library and pick them out for free without a press of toll. Even the poorest can afford them. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. We don't have, so I think that what this is doing here, this last couplet, I think that this is reaching out beyond the monetary type of idea that we get from this traverse may the poorest take without a press of toll. I think that how frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul is taking that beyond the confines of monetary value and putting it on, look, you're only going to live so many years. You may be dead tomorrow. You may be dead tonight. Maybe you were dead yesterday and no one bothered to tell you. Anyway, this idea of how frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul, I think, is not just about money, it's about more than that. So when we start breaking down the poem, what is a frigate? Why choose a frigate? From what I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, right? I am no expert in boats or military equipment, land units, naval units, any of it. A frigate is sort of like a Humvee, but in the water. A Humvee being that it is sort of the culmination of armor and maneuverability. You've got the middle line of both of those ideas. You're not the fastest on land, and you're not a tank with all of that armor. But you have maneuverability, you have speed, you have a little bit of armor. In my understanding, that's sort of what a frigate was. So, versatility of literature. when we start looking at this poem and understanding that a frigate is that type of warship that has the pinnacle of the intersection of maneuverability, speed, and armor, we understand a little bit better why the comparison is made to that specific ship. And also, it gives us an insight into corsairs with poetry, in that they are more lithe and faster, but with less armor. There is not quite as much depth, perhaps, to poetry as an entire novel. There is no frigate like a book. Even the frigates in the military cannot get you the places that books can. Even the frigates in the military cannot get you there safely like a book can. Even the frigates in the military cannot get you there with the maneuverability, with the sort of panache that a book will get you there. This is really a simple poem, but this is the argument for literature. This is the entire argument for literature. This is the idea that we get to learn from the mistakes of others. This is the idea that when we pick up a book and we read about Jay Gatz becoming the Great Gatsby to impress a woman, and everything goes to pot, right? This is that idea. We get to learn from that instead of doing it. This is an idea that goes very far back in evolution. One of my favorite ironies about evolution is that basically paranoia, as well as the ideas of religion, they all live kind of in the frontal lobe. The newest expanse, the newest addition to our brain capacity, right? The higher apes, their heads go back, ours go up. This is where religion lives. Hopefully I did not speak too far away from the microphone for that to be understood. The higher apes, their heads go back. Our heads go up. This newest edition of our brain is where those ideas of attribution and religiosity live. In lower apes, there is a great big bone right here on the mandible, and the muscle of the jaw is rooted on the top of your head. When humans started cooking meat, making the meat easier to digest, and started using fire, they think is when this started. This evolution became plausible, feasible. When we started using fire on our food, instead of having to chomp down on great big stalks, we got to cook them, make them easier to chew. That bone through which the muscle passes started to shrink, because those muscles are rooted here. When that bone shrunk for the muscle to go through, this muscle here became weaker. Because this muscle here became weaker, our frontal lobe expanded. And that allowed new areas of brain to grow. In that new area of brain, we decided on God. We'll take one. And that was also when storytelling, they think, rose. So great apes, bonobos, chimpanzees, gorillas, they don't tell stories. They can warn each other. They don't have art. Right? With art, we can tell stories by which we learn from others instead of having to make the mistakes ourselves. Animals can do this by watching, a gorilla can do this by watching another gorilla make a mistake, and he knows, I'm not making that one. We don't have to have the real life example. We can learn through literature. This is the entire argument for literature. Literature is that which allows us to grow without experiencing. Now, there's the whole idea of being book smart versus intelligent. Book smart is someone who has everything they've learned through books, but they haven't experienced anything in the real world. Maybe they can't figure anything out in the real world without being given the answer. You can be smart without being intelligent. You can be educated without being intelligent. We see a lot of that. This idea of there being no frigate like a book is the entire basis for what literature is and its uses. This is why, so for example, I've always said that an idiot can read Shakespeare and say, yeah, there's literature in that. But if you hand the right someone, I don't know, 50 Shades of Grey, something that has very little literary merit on the nose, very little literary merit on the surface, you hand that to the right someone, they can explain it into a masterpiece. That is what literature really is. But there are higher forms of literature. This is to say that, yes, in the hands of a dimwit, Shakespeare can still be literature. In the hands of that same dimwit, 50 Shades of Grey probably is not. But there is still more literary merit to Shakespeare than 50 Shades of Grey. Don't come at me. Don't argue with me. It's a real thing. Yeah, I think that's that argument. So, didn't expect to go there with this poem off the top of my head, to be quite honest. But down here, hauntology. We're going to give a hauntological interpretation. Now, I want to bring up the idea of ephemeral realities from hauntology. Ephemeral realities highlight the interconnectedness of all things, suggesting that the past continues to exert influence on the present and the future. This interconnectedness may be experienced as a web of associations, synchronicities, or symbolic connections that link disparate elements of existence together. It invites us to explore the hidden connections between seemingly unrelated events or phenomena, revealing the underlying patterns that shape our world. Now, I got this definition of ephemeral realities from ChatGPT. I don't remember this bit in any of the reading that I've done on hauntology, revealing the underlying patterns that shape our world. I don't remember that bit. I'm not going to say that it is not in hauntology. I don't know that part of it. But what is a book taking the place of a frigate to take us away to faraway lands so that we can, whether we are the poorest or not, avoid that toll? What is that besides an ephemeral reality? I argue that an ephemeral reality need not be a reality. The ephemeral underrides the reality. So, fictions can be ephemeral realities just as much as previous real realities can underride reality. In this way, and indeed, Mark Fisher seems, from what I have read of his work, to make that argument as well, the argument for art being a reality of its own. If that is an argument that we can accept, that fictions can be realities in the ephemeral realm that do influence the real world, then this poem has a very strong hauntological bent, a bent towards realities that never really existed, realities that do not, at the current moment, exist. Now, if we're going to get into philosophy, let's get into philosophy, man. There is a term that became popular in 1981, simulacra. Simulacra and surrealities, simulacra and realities, something like that. But basically, what it's saying is that we live in a world where so many simulacra are rising that are replacing the real world. You have a video game, that's a simulacrum. You have movies, simulacrum, books, simulacrum. And I don't remember the actual in-depth argument of this. Was this, I can't remember which philosophy this was part of, but it was a big one in the 60s. But simulacra, this book came out in the 80s. Simulacra means a reality that is, a realm, a place that replaces the real world. Most often, almost in a mirror type way. A nihilistic interpretation of this poem would be that if we spend all of our time, especially the poorest among us, traveling without traveling, but using that book like a frigate, what we are doing is creating a simulacrum which thereby collapses the meaning of reality. The meaning of reality being collapsed, we come to a place of weak nihilism, a nihilism of nothing, a philosophy of nothingism. There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any corsairs like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without a press of toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul.